Hello, everybody, and welcome to S-Factor Labs. My name is Cy Prime, and no, I'm not. Hello. Take two. Oh.
Oh no!
Oh no. What way to start? Okay, Restart.
Roll the intro.
All right. Take two. Hello, everybody. Welcome to CounterPick New Perspectives. I think I messed up the first time by not even saying the title right. My name is...
First time didn't happen.
Yeah, my name is Samuel Ray, also known as Dr. Sam. And with me is my co-host...
Cy Prime, what's up? Supervillain, mad genius, casual, amateur fighting game commentator, many things. You can call me Samson, you can call me Cy Prime, Cy, or Prime, Professor Prime. I have many names.
Yeah. And so this show, CounterPick New Perspectives, is our little podcast where we basically just talk about various topics kind of through the lens of gaming, right? They're generally related to video games or just entertainment in general, actually. But usually the root is video games and things like design concepts, psychological concepts, and other such stuff. And so in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the concept of the meta. So I guess we got to start off with defining the meta, right?
Yep. And I am actually ready for this.
There you go.
So now I have seen some people say that it's an acronym that stands for most effective tactics available. Now, that's not the original meaning, but it is a fairly accurate, quick definition of what it is. Now, what it actually stems from is the Greek meta, which means after or beyond. It's an adjective, means like more comprehensive, transcending. Essentially, it's referring to the game beyond the game.
Mm-hmm.
The knowledge that goes beyond gameplay that feeds into improving at the game.
Right.
You know, similarly, when people refer to like meta humor, self-referential humor, things like Deadpool, looking at the fourth wall, talking to the viewers. There's like in tabletop RPG, right? There's metagaming, which is using knowledge that the player knows that their character doesn't, in a way that sort of breaks the immersion of like there's no reason for the character to actually act in a certain way, because once again that's knowledge beyond the internal environment of the game.
Right. Yeah. And so when you take the concept of the meta and apply it to games, it's basically the aspect of the games, the knowledge, the theory, the kind of study, I guess you could say, that players are able to do outside of actually playing the game. And so it's usually used,
and like that retroactive acronym describes, it leads to the most effective tactics available.
Exactly. And so
knowledge outside the game to find what is the best, the most effective way to play the game.
Yep. It's usually used most often used in PvP games, right? Competitive games, player versus
PvP,
player.
PvP.
And so the meta is usually referred to that's the thing. It's sometimes used in PvE games when like the goal is more high scores or speed running times and stuff. So the meta is usually used in any kind of competitive capacity where
like,
a set of
like
tactics.
you mentioned in the last episode, Monster Hunter, being the main example that we come to with PvE metas, being able to defeat the monster quick enough. Or as quick as possible.
Yeah, so it's applied when any set of tactics, tools, or strategies is more effective than others, when the goal is to be more effective than others.
Yeah.
So, and we wanted to talk particularly about the way that this affects the game, like the player experience, because more often than not, when it comes to competitive games, obviously your goal is to win, right? It's to either do said thing better than others, or it is to literally beat others directly head to head. And so when applied to anything that is, we'll start with head to head, right? Let's start with head to head competitive games. Things like fighting games, shooters, first person, third person.
Fighting games tend to be the first one that
games in
or
which,
at least with us,
games in which to win, others must lose.
Yes.
And so it's to prevail over others in real time.
I would say the most preeminent example of a meta game, at least in my opinion, would be the tier list. The classic fighting game tier list. Because what do you have control over in a traditional fighting game? What character you play. That's it.
Very much.
In nearly any fighting game, all fighters are not created equal. There are going to be some characters that are better than others, and if you want to win a competition, picking a character who is better gives you a better chance. That's just how it works. And so you have things like the tier list, which just generally measures like which characters are better than which other than more, like which characters are better than the most amount of characters.
Yeah,
right?
There you go.
And then you have you get into more complicated ones like matchup charts, where you take each matchup into consideration, because some high tier characters may sometimes have a bad matchup against a lower tier character, or at least worse than it should be when looking at their general tier list placements.
Yeah, so essentially which characters have the most favorable matchups, how easily are they able to, like, are the built-in tools with the theory of both players being of equal skill.
Well, see, but then it gets into, like, it gets necessarily into an aspect which connects to the social aspect of competitive games, which is having more good matchups doesn't necessarily mean a better character. You need to have good matchups against the best characters, right? If there are like 20 low tier characters in a game and 5 like S tier characters, it doesn't matter if you have like dominating matchups against those 20 low tier characters if you have bad matchups against the 5 top tier characters. So having good matchups against good characters matters more. They're not all weighted equally, right?
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because in my experience there's a lot of times where you can have your top tier characters that just have the most favorable matchups. So if you're in a competitive setting, picking them gives you the best odds of victory, right? So but then you have these off meta picks that will hard counter those top tiers but may struggle against other non-top tier, right? So it's not always the case. You know what I mean?
That's why I'm saying it necessarily interacts with the social aspect of it, because just looking at roster numbers isn't necessarily accurate if you're talking about tournaments, because you're going to have less players playing low tier characters than you have the amount of players playing high tier characters. So if you have better matchups against high tier characters, that actually makes it more likely for you to win, even if it's less characters by number. It'll be more players.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. There are those cases, like I said before, where you may have your top tier character, but then you can have an oddball off meta pick that hard counters them, but struggles against mid tiers or even low tiers. But that doesn't happen as often. But it does happen sometimes, and that can be the same in you can interchange characters with loadouts in shooters or operators or whatever, hero shooters, anything character based, or like decks, right? Deck archetypes in card games, or factions in an RTS, what have you.
So you remind me as well, because so we went through, and we'll probably come back to fighting games at some point, but we went through like, it's the the metagame is both like what tools you pick and how you use those tools, right? So in fighting games, the main tools you pick are the characters, but then you have tactics in how you play them. If you played like I don't know, like Ken as a zoner in any game, you're not going to be playing him very effectively.
Pretty much. Like he's always been a worse zoner than his counterpart.
Yeah, you might as well play Ryu. So but in other games like shooters, like you mentioned, there it comes down to things like the weapons, and if there are like special abilities or items,
map awareness,
depending
or map
on
knowledge.
the kind of shooter you're playing, whether it's like normal shooters like, I don't know, Battlefield or whatever, or like hero shooters like Overwatch.
Well, that's the thing. Hero shooters like Overwatch
else
are even closer to the likes of fighting games and MOBAs, in that they're what you can do is very dependent on the character you choose.
Team aspect.
Yeah, but still very dependent on the characters you choose, right? And
let's see, like the earliest aspect of like strategies, meta strategies in shooters, though, I believe is the I don't have like an in-depth knowledge of this, but I've learned of some of these things by watching videos, like mini documentaries or essays about different people in the gaming sphere and whatnot. There was apparently at some point in one of the old shooters, I forget which one it was probably Battlefield, over like active play versus camping, right?
I mean, no, I think that was COD, but yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Camping around corners or in chokehold points.
That's like the most distinct difference in gameplay style in shooters, right? When you boil it down, it's basically the difference between, it's most analogous to the difference between rushdown and zoning in fighting games, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's different like weapon types, like you have your sniper rifles, which are made for long range and kind of camping out somewhere until you get made, right, or fire off a shot and you better relocate. And then there's like obviously your rapid fire weapons that tend to have less range on them. You have your semi-autos, your more marks, there's a variety. Shotguns, which are just best at point blank. And so there is a lot of variance in there too, but
but I'm talking about strategy. Like that's the most distinct difference in strategies in shooters, whether you go to the opponents or you let the opponents come to you.
Well, for team deathmatch, yes, but then you have to bring it to the mix games like Counter-Strike and Valorant, where it's more objective based, and then the strategy really opens up, because now it's how do you approach planting the thing, or how do you approach defusing it, how do you approach controlling a point or versus taking a point. What was that other mode? Escorting the payloads, right? There's those objective-based shooters really change up the dynamic, and strategy becomes more of a thing.
I've never played very many of those objective-based modes in shooters, other than like Overwatch. Overwatch has a different objectives. I may have mentioned this before, I may have not. I loved Transformers: Fall of Cybertron.
Yeah. That was mostly just team deathmatch and point control. It was really
just team deathmatch,
and then there was King of the Hill point control type stuff.
Yeah, there might have been a point control, but actually, I hadn't even thought of this before we started, before I mentioned it. But like my strategy in that game was because there were 4 classes, which are basically like the Optimus Prime type, the Bumblebee type, the Megatron type, and the Starscream type.
Yep.
And I played the Starscream type, the only one that could turn into a plane. The scientist flew around the battlefield looking for advantageous moments, seeing like 1v1s between an ally and an opponent, making it a 2v1, cleaning them up. Sometimes had to run away when it got a little hairy, but I would go around looking for those opportunities to tip the scales, and I would either get pickoffs or fly away to fight another day, and then also watch out for countering the other flyers.
Yeah, very hit and run, opportunistic,
really
turning 1v1s into
Starscream.
2v1s, or just trying to tip the scales in engagements by adding an extra combatant at the right moment. Yeah, very Starscream, which you enjoyed that. But yeah, like, and the thing about the meta, right, is, and I've heard it said this way, but the meta, and I heard it said this way by Josh Strife-Hayes, who's a YouTuber that I enjoy listening to his thoughts on things. His focus is mostly MMOs, especially MMORPGs, and in those, they're not competitive per se. Sometimes there is a PvP mode, but it's usually an afterthought, right? Something on the side, never what's the main meat of the content. And so, unless you're talking about ones where it's like open world faction based PvP, or with stuff like pirating and whatnot, but that's not really balanced for competitive play, right? It's not an arena where it's regulated rule sets, so when we're talking about competitive play, we're talking about that more regulated, with strict rule sets. Here's your objective, do this thing, win, lose.
But in every MMORPG, you have people who have like those very specific strategies for leveling up, for doing raids, which actually that is more similar to something like Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter is basically raids on monsters.
And so what he said was about the meta, and I'm just paraphrasing, but he essentially said that the meta is often used as a tool to restrict player freedom, because when something, and obviously this is more the case when a meta is over centralized, when something is so drastically more powerful than everything else, that to not use it is a huge disadvantage, to the point where there's almost no point, right? You're hardly going to have a fighting chance, in which case your choice is literally play what's effective, or
kneecap yourself.
Purposefully give yourself a worse experience, right? And that does restrict your choice. That's a lack of player freedom to play how you want and what you find fun.
That ties into something I believe we mentioned in the last podcast episode as well, about like giving the example of raid, like MMORPG raids like World of Warcraft or whatever. When you get up to high levels, it's like you have to play each like phase and roll like
the baseline required level of knowledge and execution is higher.
Some people find that fun, the like, or either it's fun to them, or like they're already in too deep and they just need the rewards from it. Like doing it isn't necessarily fun, but like
anything else won't give enough reward for time. Having the things that you get from it is the fun part to some people, I think. I guess so.
You get to the point where you have to play in such a stringent way that there's no freedom, and like those super difficult encounters are made for those kinds of players, I believe, because they've gotten so good that nothing else is a challenge. But as long as that doesn't, like, the game doesn't get to the point where like the people who aren't to that level are having to like restrict their play like that. Like,
and I have a great example of that from firsthand experience. And you can actually follow that on my channel, plug. Because it's been recorded in VODs and video uploads and stuff. But Monster Hunter Rise, which I played from the time it came out on Switch, the Switch version. But through the vast majority of that game, I would say, just to give a rough percentage, I would say roughly 90 to 95% of the content in the base game, all but the like 9 hardest missions that were all extra missions, right? The DLC hunts, the event quests.
Right.
All but like a handful of the event quests, I was able to complete with my own custom build, with no regard for what the community deemed as the meta builds, right? The most effective builds for your weapons and armor sets.
Yeah.
And decoration slots and all that good stuff. I was using my own build that I honed and modified throughout my whole play style. My own builds, about 3 different builds, through the vast majority of the content, was able to clear it with enough player skill, right? It wasn't required that I needed to use certain builds. Once I got to those ones, the like Apex Emergency, some of the Apex Emergency quests, I would say about half of those, and like the advanced quests, like the advanced fast tracks, at that point, my build was not up to snuff, wasn't able to take enough hits, like survive. I was getting like one-shotted by some of them. And so I decided at that point, I'm like, you know what? For one, it's not a PvP game, so it's not I'm required to use a meta build in order to have a fighting chance against other players. This is the hardest content in the game. I played through 95% of the content with my own builds. I think I'm okay looking up a meta build, making it, and then clearing this content, because at that point, clearing that content was the source of the satisfaction, right?
Yeah.
And so it earned, in my mind, the game had earned the having missions where I was required to use more meta builds in order to not get one shot, because of how much of the game was doable with my own builds. Right, and it wasn't like baby easy either. Through some of the harder missions that I was still able to clear with my own builds. So I feel like it earned enough goodwill that having to resort to some meta builds for a small handful of quests didn't feel like too much of a restriction, because of how much of it I had freedom to play through. Right.
Well, that sounds kind of similar to the I haven't played World of Warcraft, but that sounds similar to the World of Warcraft example that I gave. It's like, the game doesn't start at end level raids, but like you're playing long enough and you're dedicated enough,
exactly,
then you get to the point where you have to use the meta bits. Now we haven't
but the difference is I didn't have anyone yelling in my ear to use meta builds. True. So that aspect of frustration was not there, of other players trying to force using the meta upon you. In PvP, that's because in a lot of situations like that, where a meta is a thing in a PvP, you kind of sometimes you feel, or at least you're made to feel like you have to play meta in order to have a fighting chance against those who are using meta, right? Or at the very least, use a hard counter for the meta. In which case you're still don't have much freedom. And then in the cases of the people with the wrong expectations, or not playing with the right crowd, right, the like-minded people, trying to force the meta upon those the unwilling, right?
Now I don't want to bulldoze ahead if you have anything more to say on the
that was just my main thing, is like the meta can become a very bad thing, and that's the thing. This is an interesting case of a topic where my mindset on it is actually a little more skewed towards the negative. I'm generally not a fan of the meta, especially in PvP games, because of that reduction of my freedom to play how or who I want, right? And so for me, having less of a prevalent meta is actually a good thing in my mind. Is just
no, I'm more, I think I'm more neutral, but I kind of I feel like how we do this is a lot of the time either occasionally we're on opposite sides, or you're the one with the stronger opinion and I kind of play devil's advocate sometimes. But
in this case, you've been on both sides of the meta.
I did want to bring up again what we mentioned it briefly at the beginning of the episode, but card games.
Yes.
Right. This is a case where I may be the one with the negative opinion. Because the thing about card games, as opposed to something like fighting games or shooters, you know, the examples that we've given, or MMOs even, although like MMOs are one of the cases where like numbers are everything, you know.
Yeah.
Like if you go into PvP against someone who's a higher level, like you're just not winning if
Pretty much.
The difference is great enough. Like no amount of skill.
And that can enable griefing, right? Especially with open world PvP, where you can literally, you know, gank someone and then steal all their stuff. That's why though that subgenre of MMO is very casual, unfriendly.
Now card games aren't usually to the level of like no amount of skill will overcome the numbers, because there is a bit more like skill expression depending on the card game. But so I'm using Dragon Ball Fusion World as an example.
Yep, that's the recent example.
I've been playing that recently. It's a bit newer, so we've seen it, you know, the meta evolving from set 1. We're currently in set 2. So at first, in short, Broly was the king of the meta. You know, actually, funnily enough, there's a character in a leader card in the game, Ginyu, that would have been actually pretty strong if it wasn't for Broly existing, because, well, and one card in red. There are, well, now 5. There's going to be 5 color classes in set 3, but there's currently 4: red, blue, yellow, green. But so Ginyu likes to swarm out a lot of 20,000 power cards, and you can only deal damage to another card or the enemy leader card if an attack gets through with equal or more power. Right? You can use other cards in your hand to combo to give your attack more power. That's the general idea. Now, most leader cards start at 15,000 power, and then they awaken at half health to 20,000 power, and they get access to their special ability. Broly is a little different in that he awakens to 25,000 power. So that means Ginyu, a character who specializes in swarming out 20k beaters, is going to have a lot harder time with Broly, because you have to like spend a card from your hand for a combo for every attack just to get a chance to try to deal damage. But then they can combo on defense to prevent you from doing that. So you're going to have a lot of resource bleed there. He is impossible. Like, that's an actual impossible matchup in set 1. So he was just pushed out of the meta entirely.
Gotcha.
And there can be cases like that. It's more about matchups when a game becomes like impossible in card games.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about card games, because like in fighting games, right? As long as it's not like a super imbalanced fighting game, a low tier can beat a top tier generally if you are good enough. Yeah. Unless you're in like a tier 0 meta, basically.
Gotcha.
Like with something like Steve, right? Like you're never going to expect a Steve in Smash Brothers to be beaten by a Ganondorf.
Yeah, or, unless for example, you have a newbie playing Steve and an experienced player playing Ganondorf, then the experienced player is going to win. So a huge skill gap can make a difference, but...
Well, yeah, but you can also play Broly badly and get...
But that's why the assumption is generally for the meta and tier lists and the like, is that players are of equal to comparative to equal skill.
But then,
so always operate on that assumption.
In set 2, right, they released 4 more leaders, and like 3 of them were balanced. Actually, like 2 of them were probably too weak, or one of them was definitely too weak.
Yeah.
And then one of them, they just decided, you know what? He's tier 0. God Goku, Super Saiyan God Goku, can be the actual god of the meta. Just because, and one of the things that was the issue was the cards made to work with him, because he's based on the Tournament of Power section of the anime. He has an effect that works with cards with the trait Tournament of Power, and there's a like super rare card, Kefla, which is 4 costs. It's kind of like games like Hearthstone, where you get more energy turn after turn. So you can only play low costs early, and you ramp up over time.
The game forces you to slowly ramp up the power of the cards you're able to play.
So Kefla is like a mid-game card, 4 cost. But when you play her, you get to play another TOP trait card from your hand. So you can play like 7 energy worth of cards for 4. But then here comes Goku with his special ability. Once you awaken at actually 3 life, you can spend only 1 energy and discard 1 card to play a Tournament of Power card from your hand with that's 20k or less power for the cost of his ability. So you can use that to play Kefla, who has 20k power, and then buffs herself when your leader is awakened. So she's basically 25k, and then Kefla gets to play another card from your hand for free. So you get 7 energy worth of cards for 1 and a discard. And then you have another version of Kefla that the first Kefla can play that draws you a card. So guess what? There's no drawback.
It's pretty crazy to give that much power without drawback.
To like everything. Even Broly had a drawback, because like every leader generally gets to draw a card every time they attack, except for the ones that become 25k power when they awaken instead of 20,000. They stop being able to draw a card on attack. So like Broly, even though he was unquestionably the king of set 1, some leaders could potentially rush him down early, force him to awaken, and then he would be able to draw less cards. So you could just whittle him down before you could start dropping bombs on you. But God Goku has no weaknesses, no drawbacks. And so they literally had to implement a ban list, which still hasn't been actually implemented into the
digital game,
digital client yet. It's going to go into effect in like 2.5 weeks. But they limited, because the maximum limit of 1 card in your deck is 4 copies.
One of the cards that's key to the overpowered strat.
They limited the Kefla that I mentioned, the 4 cost that plays another card, to 1, and then banned a Roshi card that helps you awaken, and banned another card as well, Ribrianne, which is a double strike. It deals 2 damage when it deals damage instead of 1, and it's a 4 cost with 20k power. Basically, like most colors have a 5 cost card that's a double strike. Ribrianne was a card that you could play off of the first Kefla in cases where you just needed quick damage.
So that makes me think of something. That makes me think that in some cases, that's fine. That brings me to another thought then about the meta. The meta, it's not always a completely negative thing. It's actually a great source of information, and it can sometimes be a great indicator of how balanced a game is, right? So if you're seeing a meta where one character, deck, style, archetype, loadout, what have you, strategy is just so predominantly dominant, with like just beyond a question, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is the most powerful thing in the game. Nothing else can even contest.
That's
kind of
what
meta.
They call tier 0 in card games.
That kind
Not
of
tier
meta.
1, tier 0.
And that kind of meta is a strong indicator of a lack of balance in the game, and that kind of information can actually help you make an informed decision on whether or not it's a game you want to put time into it in its current state, right?
You know what, classic example, again going back to Smash Brothers, right? Melee, a lot of people love the meta of Melee. There is an inarguable, like mostly inarguable king of melee, which is Fox. But the thing is, a lot of melee players agree that it's still pretty fun to fight Fox because you can, like, if you get that hit, he's combo food. Now he is very strong, but also very skill intensive. So his wins aren't free. You have to put in the work, and also he has a counter in Marth who deals with spacies very well. Fox and Falco. So it's not tier 0.
And while that game is so old without any patches and has a very clearly defined meta, that meta in and of itself has an almost triangle, like rock paper scissors relationship between its top tier characters that keeps it relatively balanced in competitive play.
Fox, Marth, Sheik.
Exactly.
Marth beats Fox. Fox beats Sheik. Sheik beats Marth.
Exactly. And so, and then you have the oddballs that can
for
fight.
Outliers.
Yeah. Peach,
Yoshi. Well, like
Yoshi,
Peach, Yoshi, Jigglypuff. The oddball characters that take a certain type of player to play that most people aren't. Most people in that game are going to
while
gravitate toward.
So while there is a clear best in the game, the gap between that and other characters isn't so great that it's an unwinnable matchup, right? There are no unwinnable matchups in that game.
But then in contrast,
okay, I'm wrong about that. No, like Fox versus Ganondorf is pretty much unwinnable for Ganondorf.
Like there's also like Pichu is terrible.
But I'm saying,
How could I forget Ice Climbers is also a very
right.
But even without wobbling.
So let's continue with the Smash Brothers train. Yeah.
In contrast, there's Roll, right?
Yes.
With Meta Knight.
Yeah.
The Meta Knight.
Yeah.
And see,
just head and shoulders above everyone, despite not having a head and shoulders.
Yeah, but also, see, here's the thing. Not only does the hard data matter of matchups, right? It also matters how it feels. Because the reasons why Meta Knight is the best character differ a lot from the reasons why Fox is the best character in Melee, and it makes fighting Meta Knight abysmal.
Yeah.
It feels abysmal from everything that we know, from everything that we've seen in like videos and whatnot. You know, his ability to plank, camping at the ledge, especially since back in that game, ledge invincibility didn't go away.
Yeah, it would refresh on the re-grabbing.
So you could flap at the edge, keep like swinging the sword. You couldn't approach. You could sky camp. His attacks were way too fast. You could just fly around, spam him out. His recovery was super good. But even in other characters who are good, like the reasons why it's not as fun to as many people is like other characters that are good have the things that make them good are like things like chain grabs, just way too easy to do, like near guaranteed death, or at least like a lot of guaranteed damage. And actually we watched an interesting video about the worst matchup in Brawl, because surprisingly it's not Meta Knight versus Ganondorf, the literal best character versus worst character. It's actually a case of, like I mentioned earlier, certain like outlier matchups that aren't based on the general tier list. Marth versus Ness, because he has an inescapable just infinite combo, chain grab release, grab again, keep pummeling until he's high enough to just hit with a smash attack. It's guaranteed. You lose off of one grab, and it's even easier. It's like easier to do than even something like wobbling in Melee.
Yeah.
And like everything about the matchup and how the characters work kind of funnels Ness onto the ground, and like about how the game works even too, so that you will get grabbed eventually, to the point where the players actually, even if it wasn't banned necessarily in a place or a region, would elect not to use that just because it would undermine the entire point of determining who has more skill.
Pretty much. And okay, so then going into the next one, Smash 4 eventually did have another situation of like one character that was just too powerful, and that was Bayonetta. To an extent where in one of the major tournaments, grand finals was Bayonetta versus Bayonetta, and like the community themselves were and never do this, people, never do this, but they were actually directing hate towards the players of Bayonetta, not just the character, because of how frustrated they were with the character, with fighting against Bayonetta. And it's just like, obviously never do that. That don't hate a person for playing a character. It's a game, right?
Yeah.
No person real life person should receive hate for the character they play in a game. Period.
Now those two Bayonetta players in that grand finals did
well, they were pushing back against the hate. They were acting out against the haters, essentially.
Yeah, I mean,
so if they had never, if they had never received the hate, they probably never would have thought to do that. But either way,
probably.
It's possible. Regardless, that's not the point.
Still not condoning.
It created
harassment, whichever, no matter which.
But in this case,
started it, but
but in this case, it was another case where the meta felt stale, right? And that's another issue that happens when you have
because you would just explode off of one hit. Yep. And it was super easy to do. See, that's the thing. Part of it is also how easy it is to do the thing that is the most effective.
Yes.
Because it just feels bad. Then, like, if the best character in the game is like skill intensive, then you can still be like, okay, I respect that. They did that. They earned that.
Well, yeah, because
that's how it is with Fox. But like, if you just explode off of like a super easy to do combo, boom, bam, zero to death, you're done, then that feels bad. And there's no point to use any more difficult character then if you're just gonna explode off of like no effort.
Centralization. And the thing is, and to go off of what you're saying, if the meta is easy to use, then that means it's going to affect more skill level play. Right, it's going to affect more skill levels. It's going to trickle down to medium and sometimes even the lower skill levels. Rarely lower skill levels, because generally speaking, players of that skill at the floor don't know how to do things effectively, right, and with intentionality. But if the not as many. But if the meta thing is relatively easy to do once you know what you're doing in the game fundamentally, then you're going to start seeing the meta kind of take over the middle range of skill, right? The medium range of skill. And that is when it really becomes a negative thing, because then you're seeing that restriction of freedom, right? And that negative effect on the player experience happening to, I would say honestly, to the worst audience, right? It's the majority audience, the middle level, the people who stay with the game but aren't necessarily the top level skill. And at that level of skill in the middle, they don't know how to counterplay the meta, right? They won't know as often how to counterplay what's most effective and easy to do. So they're the ones who suffer the most, because at the top level you can have killers, right? High level players who can play off meta characters and still have a fighting chance against the top players using the meta, because the skill level is equivalent, right? Comparable. But in the middle range, where there's the widest range of skill levels, that's when the meta can be the biggest issue. And that's why, honestly, so a lot of people say that the meta of the top, you can kind of separate meta by skill levels too, to an extent, right? As long as the over centralizing thing isn't, well, as long as the most effective thing is not over centralizing nor easy to do, then you can say that the meta of the hardcore or high skill minority doesn't represent the meta of the medium level, right?
Well, okay, so and I have something else to bring out on another topic, but so on this though, I think the main thing is there are different factors that are going to take up a bigger slice of the pie, right? According to each different skill level. So like, because for instance, like you basically mentioned before, in low level, right, certain things are going to be easier and have counters, but the low level players don't know how to counter that thing. So characters like zoners, for instance, are going to be stronger at low level because they don't know how to combat that. And especially because it's frustrating when you lose to zoning. But most of the time they aren't actually that high tier. Now, as opposed to in high tier, right? There are going to be some characters, or like, sorry, high skill play, right?
Yeah.
There are going to be some characters in most fighting games which are high execution. They're very good, but high execution. So those characters are usually only going to matter considerably in high level skill. Like, for instance, I go to Tekken, right? You've got your classic Mishimas. They're they're generally the high execution, very good but high execution characters. So they aren't really going to be problems necessarily in mid-level play, and definitely aren't going to be a problem in low-level play.
Exactly.
But sometimes they can be too strong in top-level play. Another example being Akira Yuki in Virtua Fighter, right? Very difficult to play, but very effective when you do play him that way.
Yeah,
now,
when the baseline required level of skill to play him effectively is, is higher, that skill floor is higher, less people are going to be able to take advantage of it inherently.
Yeah, so the mid-level is going to be that average between those two ends, where, because like you can't necessarily take all of the, or even much, honestly, of the complaints of like low-level play, because they'll be saying stuff like the zoners are overpowered. Like, in most cases they really aren't.
Yeah.
but then high-level players will sometimes or often sort of be disconnected from what mid-level players have to deal with.
Yeah.
So I would say it's more often that high-level players' complaints are valid than low-level players, but overall I would average to the mid-level. Now, something I wanted to bring out though that hasn't been mentioned yet, there is also the aspect of money playing into the meta. Right? Now, in fighting games, obviously, DLC, right?
Yes.
Classic $5 to win. That kind of like with especially Bayonetta in Smash 4, and Steve in Smash Ultimate.
And you know what? I'm gonna venture to say too, I think the Overwatch 2 community is also like their player base is also feeling this because of how you don't just get all characters with the purchase of the game like Overwatch 1. Now you have to kind of grind or spend real money on characters, and a lot of times the newer characters are stronger.
Yeah, so there's that too. And that can amplify frustrations and feelings of unfairness, because then it's going to feel even worse if a player just has more chance of winning because they spent more money. Like, that's going to be even worse.
That evokes the pay to win feeling.
But see, the thing is though, something that you don't think of as much in that regard, right? Because you're not as much of a card player, but that is even more so in card games, TCGs, things like Fusion World, even Yu-Gi-Oh! And like, I've heard of stuff about like the paper play and Yu-Gi-Oh! And whatnot. Like, there's formats where like it's like tier 1 or even tier 0, where the best deck is like very expensive.
Yeah. And
the next best decks in paper are close to as expensive, but not nearly as close in effectivity.
Right.
So at that point, you really only have two viable options, which is shell out for the best deck, or go the complete opposite direction and play something that is designed to stop the game from being played.
Right.
Just completely counter what the meta is, and for a cheaper price, instead of buying into the cash grab.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
money is even more of a driving factor in the meta in card games like that.
Let's be honest.
Even digital card games as well, because you'll have like super rares, secret rares. Oh, you didn't pull the secret rares that are like super good for this deck. Well, spend more money to get packs, or just deal with the grind, playing games every day, getting little bits of the currency for free.
Yeah.
And some games like Fusion World can be a little stingy with that free currency.
Yeah. Well, it's like I've said before.
There's differences in that too, with how like you can't buy singletons in digital as opposed to paper. But
it's like
in
I've said
paper,
before,
it may cost more.
Trading cards, and by extension, trading card games or collectible card games in the case of digital, because you can't trade, were the first gotcha.
Breach.
Yeah, trading cards and collectible cards were the first gotcha. You're literally blind pulling from packs of cards, and the rarest ones are in limited quantity, which is one thing that collectible like digital card games have over physical ones, is that rarities are based on what's what I'm looking for, on probability rather than scarcity. Right, there's not a limited amount of them printed. It's just they just apply a probability.
It is digital scarcity, though.
It's a simulated scarcity. Yeah, there's not a finite amount of said rare cards, and honestly, you can increase how many of them are, owned by players by increasing the amount of packs that are pulled, so to speak. Right.
Yeah.
So, whereas with physical card games, there is a finite amount of every card printed, and therefore, how many determines their rarity. And so, but they were the first gotcha.
The secondhand market can, for one thing, exist, but two, be volatile, depending on how the meta is at the moment. Because then, if a card already exists, but suddenly everyone wants it, the price is going to go up.
Yep, demand.
And then,
was it?
And then you get supply and demand.
Supply and demand, yeah.
Yeah, and then you get speculators, basically, who will be like looking at cards in the meta and be like, oh, this card is going to be
you mean prospectors
at some point in the.
They're like prospectors.
One of those. Y'all tell me in the comments which is right. But who will then look at a card and be like, make some kind of prediction, be like, oh, this card is going to be meta in the future, I know it. And some people will even like buy up large quantities of a card when it's cheap, hoping that they'll go up in price and then sell them. Basically the same thing as like trying to buy stock or scalping like figures or products. Buying them at the normal price and then trying to sell them higher when there's more scarcity.
Yeah, and so essentially card games are, in a way, they're competitive gotcha. They're PvP gotcha. And so that's why the meta, and I was going to mention this, and so you've actually created a perfect segue, but the meta does seem to affect things like card games even more than games like real-time action style PvP games, because in those, player skill can make up for a difference in a character's meta tier, right? Their meta placement.
Well, that, but also to a certain degree, you pay once. Like, you either games have been doing DLC
for the game or for the character.
Pay for the character, but like you're not paying as continuously as something like a card game where with every set you have to get new cards, either because there's a set rotation, right, and sets time out of being able to use them in competitive in the first place, or it's basically artificially rotated to where there's power creep, and it gets to the point where there's no point in using the older cards because they're just not strong enough to stack up.
Okay, so that brings up a new thought then, because here's the thing: there is a similar equivalent to that in in the other games. Patches, balance patches. It essentially does the same thing, right? A character can be at the top of the meta, one patch, one iteration, and then the next version they could be nerfed and now be too weak.
You just reminded me of something. Okay, because like in fighting games, sometimes a developer? Is it the developers, like that, or the company, whatever, whoever manages that stuff, right? They'll be reluctant to patch a character too quick because they don't want the players to, who bought the character to do well, right? And be like, oh, this character is strong, right? Because why would you buy a character if they're too weak? To feel ripped off when they get the character, and then the character is too strong, they get patched and they get nerfed too hard. And there is a thing to be said about not pulling the trigger too fast, but also sometimes there are cases where that gets in the way of a better meta because of the bottom line, right? Or if you want to be charitable, because of publicity, like they don't want to look like they're doing a scam in the other way, to be like, oh, here's a strong character, and then immediately rug pull you.
Overcorrect,
But then, basically a rug pull, give you something that
got our money,
valuable,
suckers,
and then take the value out of it.
Exactly.
That's literally the definition of a rug pull. But then there's cases in, like, similarly in card games as well. Like if something is, the new hotness and new sets, like some companies probably even have like specific policies against putting cards on like the ban list or whatever for a certain amount of time, because they don't want to.
Well, they don't want to hamstring their sales. Of the most recent packs.
Yeah, they don't want to ruffle because players are going to be even angrier if they shelled out for the meta and then it's made useless because they're going to feel scammed, and they're going to feel even more scammed because the higher level of money being part of that, right?
Exactly. So I would say money does get kind of in the way, doesn't it? So then here's what so here's a question I want to ask you then. Get your thoughts. What does a healthy meta look like?
Okay. What are we talking about? A specific kind of game, or just in general? Because
I feel like card games is almost a lost cause. I don't think they can ever truly have a balanced meta.
I mean, it also depends on if you're playing. It also depends on if you're playing in a digital format where it's usually best of one, or tournaments, which are usually best out of 3.
Yeah, because we've talked about how with like card games and stuff. Yeah, we've talked about how with card games there's two in our own conversation about how there's like two general like dominant formats for card games, and one is unlimited format where all cards that have ever been released can be used, and then they usually have to use something like a ban limited list to restrict how many of each whatever types of cards or what cards in general people can use.
Yu-Gi-Oh is very prominently the main example of that,
and that is what Dragon Ball Fusion World is doing now too.
I believe so.
And then
it's not out of the question that they may add a rotation at some point in the future when they have enough sets.
Yes, and then the other method is the rotation, where only the most recent however many packs, expansion packs,
are usually something like
viable
4 or 5, I think.
Are allowed. Usually it's like 5 from the games I've seen and played.
To give enough time for those cards that you bought to be usable. And if I remember correctly, Magic the Gathering generally plays like that. Things like Hearthstone, Shadowverse,
Teppen, and so essentially what it does is it makes it so that they can focus on balancing. I do feel like that makes a more balanced meta because there's a smaller pool of cards to balance, and that's okay. So I think
you don't have to remember some random card that you printed 10 years ago that's suddenly going to be a broken strategy with this new card that you printed today.
Exactly.
Right? So there are too many cards for
so
even
I'll give you my thoughts then, because I think this kind of ties into the direction my mind goes into with what is a healthy meta, right?
All right.
A healthy meta, and I'm gonna say this is usually a hot take with a lot of people, but I feel like it's definitely a position where limitations are necessary for a healthy meta, for balance, because and not limitations as in like, because like we said, restricting player freedom isn't a good thing, right? So you want to have enough of variety of choice for players to be able to feel like they can make their own thing, right? Or do their own thing.
You know what? Wait. I don't mean to interrupt. You just brought to mind again another example with the variety thing, because like Dragon Ball Fighters, right? And other tag fighters. There are some characters that become meta not even for the character themselves, but for the assist.
Right, a certain like function of theirs.
Yeah, early Dragon Ball Fighters, you had the beam meta where everybody would play Super Saiyan Goku on their team, or like Super Saiyan Vegeta for his rapid blast assist, and similarly in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and 3, right? You have Doom's hidden missiles, so like a whole bunch of people play Doom, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But so, what you reminded me of that with was because like when Dragon Ball Fighters updated to where every character has 3 selectable assists instead of just the one static one, giving variety, right? That actually made it so that more characters are viable because you didn't have as much disparity between characters having way better or way worse assists because each character has 3 you can select.
Yeah, so what I was going to say was I feel like a healthy meta, I don't think it's possible when you have absolute freedom, right, for the players, when everything is available, because then it becomes too difficult to balance, right? And then at the same time, even though it's too difficult to balance, the players are going to find what's optimal still.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, that's the drive.
Yeah, so I feel like you have to find that point where you do have a bit more of a limited pool to choose from, like with the pack rotations or like a smaller roster or whatever. Like once the roster gets so huge, you stop being able to balance the game, really. That's why tag fighting games and such tend to be the least balanced, because when you have to pick more than one character per player, you have to have a larger variety of characters, otherwise it's going to get real stale. You're going to start seeing the same 3 characters or 5 characters, right?
Funny enough, though, I feel like that there needs to be a balance in that for a healthy meta, because on the other hand, you know, and this complaint can sometimes be off base, but sometimes it is valid. Competitive players often don't like having too many matchups to think about. Especially in card games, you know, you can't, like, to the point where you can't tech for your you know, your most likely opponents, right? So you have to use weaker cards that are like more general use, as opposed to ones that can better counter the you know, opponents that you're going to see. But similarly in fighting games, right, people don't like having to remember a whole bunch of different matchups, and I think there is merit to that. I think a healthy metagame actually has a limited amount of top tiers, but a variety in those top tiers.
Yes, exactly. And
which is going to be very difficult to do.
Yeah, it is a very difficult thing, because it's an ongoing struggle, because it's a struggle between the developers and how the players find the ways to optimize and break the game, right? And so
it's easy to just have a very aggressive game where all of your top tiers end up being rushed down.
Yeah.
But like, it's a lot harder to have like a top tier zoner, a top tier all-rounder. You're never going to see a top tier grappler, but you know.
Well, it also feels kind of like whatchamacallit, like when you take the likes of like let's say in a shooter, the top tier weapon is a very long range weapon, like a sniper rifle type thing, right? Yeah. Then you get a meta where the optimal way to play is not to get in range where other weapons can even engage, right, can even deal any damage. It's to stay out of the opponent's range and sight. Yeah, then it becomes a very slow and passive kind of game, and then it becomes boring to play and or watch. But
or if the shotgun is way too strong, then everybody's just going to be running around, running
around like a madman, just getting as close as possible, and whoever pulls the trigger first with proper aim on the opponent wins.
Yeah, just trying to or being sneaky, just trying to be shotgun ninjas.
Yeah, but then that just becomes chaos, right?
Yeah.
And then it becomes equally tiring to watch and play.
Well, like one of the closest examples,
or like when everything is rushed down, right? And I feel like that's a bit different, because I do feel like the fighting game community has very eclectic taste, because they tend to, the majority of the fighting game players audience tend to like rushdown more than the alternatives, and they kind of like defy all logic in that way.
Well, I think I've said before, like it just makes sense. Rushdown is the most intuitively,
it's more active.
Rushdown is the most intuitively in line with the objectives of a fighting game. You want to get in, you want to deal damage, and win by dealing enough damage. Rushdown is the simplest way to do that. So
right,
it's
turn
the
brain
easiest,
off, press buttons.
Yeah, so it's the easiest kind of character to make fun and balanced.
Right.
As opposed to, we've seen before multiple times, when a zoner is top tier, it's excruciating. I couldn't think of the word.
Well, it's just like what I said. It's just like what I said with, like, even in a shooter, if sniper rifles are the predominant way to play, then the game becomes very boring and passive. So I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
More kinds of characters can enjoy. More types of characters. More types of players can enjoy running around with shotguns than sitting and sniping and trying not to get sniped.
It's why also in MOBAs, right? Your ranged characters have to be squishy, because if they were if they were tanky and had superior range, then they would just be dominant.
Yeah, like you got Widowmaker in Overwatch. Like, she was one of the only, like, 2 snipers. But if you could take her down real quick if you got some solid hits. But in fighting games, when you have the top tier zoner, then you have just absolutely abysmal characters to deal with. Like, the 2 examples that come to mind are Injustice 2, Deadshot, because he was a master of zoning and a jack of all other trades. So, like, even when you got in on him, he could actually pretty decently and reliably get away or deal some solid damage with a combo and then get away again. And then you have cases like Happy Chaos in Guilty Gear Strive. I'm not going to refer to why I'm so angry about him, but yeah, he's not fun to fight against. It's absolute lockdown with his hit scan.
He's a zoner without the usual weaknesses of a zoner, right? Because his projectile, his long range moves aren't projectiles.
Yeah, it's not a projectile; it's a disjoint.
It's a damage at a certain point on screen. So it's like you can't.
That's what a disjoint.
Yeah, you can't jump over the projectile and punish him for it because of the cooldown. You're right, the recovery frames, like most zoners.
And they tried to counteract that with the bloom.
Right, how it moves around
100% accurate, especially if you're like,
but then they gave him a tool that eliminates that weakness.
Throw an orb, you have better aim, but the thing is, people optimize it to the point where they have these crazy sequences where they
guarantee the orb like hits you.
Throw the orb, hit you with the orb, shoot again, reload, shoot, reload, throw the orb, set up a clone shield, shoot, orb, reload, and you can't get through it. And even if you do finally get through it, then you only have the chance to fight back. And that actually, strangely enough, that parallels Steve in Smash Ultimate. you have to get through the wall, even though he's not doing anything active to you, unlike Happy Chaos. Steve sets up a wall and starts mining resources.
And that building of resources is a threat in and of itself that forces the other player to approach.
It's like if Samus could, set up a wall and charge her charge shot, and then charge another charge shot, and then charge another shard shot
or
until
say
you get through the wall.
Or say in Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, if Lucilius could place up a barrier and then start charging his sword meter, right?
Yeah, but then once you get through the wall, you don't get a guaranteed reward from it. You get the chance to do something.
Yeah.
But Steve has enough tools to counter your
do stuff up close
approach, right?
Yeah.
And to punish you for trying to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's safe to say those not even just zoners, but keep away strategies
and I'd venture to say
when they're the strongest strategy.
And I remember seeing, like, I would say many in the Guilty Gear Strive community agree with you on Happy Chaos, that the meta where when he had just come out, so he was the newest and strongest character.
Oh my god, it's just like with Meta Knight, because Meta Knight could keep away as long as you want. That's what makes the worst meta. I didn't answer your question, but I answered what makes the worst meta. when a keep away strategy, no matter what way that manifests, when a keep away strategy is the most dominant strategy, that makes the worst meta.
Yeah, and I agree, and that's why I've never really advocated for complete keep away to be strong, and I'm not really a long range zoner type player myself, actually, in like action style PvP games, right?
I mean, I like a character mid-range that can zone, but like, you know, still hangs in close combat. Like,
well, you know me, I like the mid-range versatile fighter, right? That's my style. The outboxer, right? The mobile outboxer, the Muhammad Ali style fighter. You know, keep moving, play defense until you get a beat on your opponent, and then once you find an opening, then you strike, and then you shift into offense. That's the way I like to play, and that's the way I play intuitively. And the problem is, I feel like a lot of developers overcorrect to try and prevent the long range keep away from being viable, and then by doing so, they also invalidate that mid range, you know, patient outboxer style, and instead, because they go too hard into the up close and personal, right?
But I still would say,
because
though,
like you said, more people find that fun.
Yeah, my main example for a meta that is the most healthy, though, like recently, that I would point out, as far as fighting games, would be Grand Blue Fantasy versus Rising.
Right.
It's like, you look at the top 5 characters, right? Okay, let's start from the top. Nier, she's weird. I'm not sure I would call her a rush down, but like, she's a puppet fighter. She does setups.
She does setups and mix-ups, but
she can kind of outbox, but also go in and do combos. So she's kind of does everything.
Yeah, she's kind of versatile. She doesn't want to be right in your face because she's not a rush down traditional, but she doesn't want to be far away because she's not a zoner. She doesn't have projectiles like that.
I mean, she has disjoints with the puppet, so like, but
she's mid-range, right?
Quite zone.
She's
like
mid-range versatile. Yeah, with setups and mix.
Yeah, like all-rounder setup sort of character, right? Then you have I forget which one is technically higher, but Lancelot and Seox, they're both
rush down.
They're both rush down with
get up close and mix up the opponent.
Mix-ups, schmicks, movement, you know, like corner setups, resets, things like that.
Yeah.
Then you have Siegfried, who is like an offense leaning all-rounder.
But he plays more mid-range, spacing with the long range of his big old sword until...
I've fought players who play him much more rushdown, but he's kind of free to play more.
So he's mid-close
more
range,
patient, or more rushdown.
Yeah,
he's an offense leaning offense leaning all-rounder, like I said. And then Belial, as the 5th character, is even more of an all-rounder again.
Yeah.
With actually the ability to zone as well.
Yeah. And then
so it's pretty
balanced.
You just don't have like a grappler, but like there really is only one grappler.
Yeah, and then the zoners are relatively weak, are pretty weak in the game, with Eustace being the best one because he's versatile enough to be able to do other things besides just throwing projectiles at the opponent.
Like I said, Rising is, like I said, the closest to like a healthy one like that, because like Belial can zone. He's not necessarily a zoner.
Yeah, and then like I would say
it's like how Ryu isn't necessarily a zoner.
So I'm sure a lot of people who are more experienced with like MOBAs would would disagree with me, but I honestly have felt like from the MOBAs I've played, they always feel a little more balanced due to the fact that, well, for one, the characters' movesets, their kits are a bit more limited, right? And so they can more fine-tune the balance a little easier, despite there being more characters on average in MOBAs than in things like fighting games. And then
now there are cases where team composition can become centralized, and like
in Overwatch.
We have some experience with that in Overwatch, dive meta or tanks and healers.
And after we stopped playing what was called GOATs, which is just the basically pick the 6 best characters. Basically, it was like 2 tanks, 2 sustain, 2 dive.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me too of, again, I mentioned, I think last episode, because I brought in a mention of Pokemon, but I watch Wolfie Glick's videos sometimes. I don't even play Pokemon anymore, but it's interesting. There have been different formats, they call it, where different teams arise and get like nicknames and stuff. There was one meta, I forget what Pokemon were on the team, but essentially there was a very common team that basically had 5 set members, and then like 3 or 4 different Pokemon that people would use for the 6th member. So it got like that team composition became so centralized that the Pokemon team had a name.
Gotcha.
It was like Big 6 or something like that.
I see. Yeah, and so it's just like so essentially the way to have a healthy meta is to have a measure of like a restricted roster, so to speak, of what's effective, or to have what's effective. Like I would say, because like for example, we would say melee in all is probably a more balanced competitive game. Smash Bros. Melee is more balanced competitive game than a lot of what came after it, right?
It is a very aggressive game, but it is a balanced aggressive game.
Because the people who are at the top of the meta kind of balance each other out with checks and balances.
Funny enough, that's actually the reason why most players didn't like Jigglypuff,
because it shook up that set of checks and balances.
Most players who tried Jigglypuff would try to play her in the normal melee way, and then the like rare player who actually plays Jigglypuff in a way that plays their strengths better, especially Hungrybox,
so an anti-meta play style
people didn't like because of the proclivity toward actually playing more patient and floating away. She wasn't necessarily like, the lights, y'all didn't see that,
but does that mean the stream's still live?
It's still live. I've got it here.
Holy smokes. Okay.
But so like she wasn't Meta Knight level of like strong, but she had the ability to actually avoid the other player for a little bit at least. But that tangent aside.
So let's sum this up, because with the way the storms are rolling in, we may lose stream. So a healthy
Oh, sorry, me?
Oh no, you can go ahead and say your thoughts.
Okay. I would say that it's a healthy meta would have a limited amount of top let's say tools, but a variety within those tools.
Yes.
Right? Like all characters being top tier would be chaos about as much as having like like that would be bad, but also like only having one predominant strategy within top tiers would also not be great.
Over centralization.
So like a limited amount of top tiers that have a variety of skills. And that's whether it's fighting games or shooters or card games, whatever. So a measure of variety,
essentially, like ideally, at least one thing to represent each applicable playstyle, essentially.
Or strategy. I don't think it's necessarily possible to get fully to that, but having as many playstyles as possible represented in the top, while not having a huge amount of characters, decks, loadouts, whatever.
Yeah, the problem there is that's where the idea of more excess kind of goes against that. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah, more characters, more
characters, more gear, more, right? That's when eventually, inevitably, you're going to have stuff power creep other things out of being viable, and then you'll ultimately end up with less variety.
Even in all these more games, like you don't often have games where a bunch of things are top tier, because that would just require everything being as strong as each other.
Yeah, players will always eventually find what's strongest. Yeah, and optimize the variety out of the game.
So actually, the more actually leads to, because a lot of different things do the same thing, then they're only going to pick the strongest of those things that does the same thing. Therefore, like if you have a top tier rushdown and then a bunch of rushdown characters that play very similarly, then at that point there's no reason to not play the top tier rushdown. So a bunch of them are just going to be by the wayside.
Like in Melee, it's easier to have 3 to 5 characters that check and balance each other than it is to have 15 high tier meta characters that are balanced, essentially. So ultimately less actually is more, to an extent. Ironically enough, that is a situation where less is more. The less things you have to balance, the easier it is to balance them. Just make sure you don't go overboard to an extent where there's like no variety, right?
And you know what? I think one thing
that's why I said like the the rotation. Oh, what up?
Oh, I was just saying that one thing that makes that more difficult in certain types of games, particularly licensed property fighting games, right? Like Marvel vs. Capcom, or like Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, right? Like there are a bunch of characters that a bunch of different fans want to see different characters. Yeah. So it's more difficult to, with an established, like, large historic roster of characters, right, to limit that roster and stiff a bunch of the fans out of seeing their favorite character.
In which case, I would say it's better to not even focus on the meta at all from a design standpoint, but rather just to focus on giving a good representation of the fan favorites and what people want to see, like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is going to do, right? They've said that purposefully they're not going to balance the game for competitive play in that every character is viable. Certain characters
never been
certain characters are going to be more powerful than others because of that's their canon power, right? But that's also going to allow a bit more variety, I would say, for more types of players, right? That way,
I mean, people are always going to play those games like in a competitive manner, but that doesn't necessarily mean playing it competitively. I mean, playing Dragon Ball Sparking Zero competitively would just lead to a situation where once again, characters that do the same thing but worse are going to be left behind, right? It'd be like trying to it'd be like in boxing if you made it legal for a flyweight to fight a heavyweight. It's like, well, all the flyweights are just going to get pushed out of the meta, right? Essentially, like that'd be trying to, like, you're not going to bring Krillin into a tournament where every character is legal in a hypothetical.
You need some structure. You need some structure and limitations.
Like Jiren and like any Gogeta. Like at that point, unless you're a crazy person.
Yeah, you need some structure and limitation in order to create that balance, right? Yeah. But not too much to the extent that you're taking away all agency from players. So yeah. But I would definitely say less is more in that kind of case, where focusing on a smaller pool from the start allows for more balance and therefore more variety within that pool.
A limited number of tools, but a variety.
But not a small number of tools. Exactly. And people don't realize, but when you say limited amount, right, most people often, for whatever reason, equate that to less. Limited doesn't mean small amount. It means a set amount.
A limited number of types of tools.
Yeah, exactly.
But a variety of strong tools of different types.
Yep. And I think that's where a lot of things fail, right? Because
like 5 very different but equally useful tools instead of having like 20 different wrenches and just using the best wrench.
Yeah, and that's where my gripes kind of come in, especially with like the modern fighting games, because they kind of limit the types of tools that you're able to use. Yeah, right. Like you said, even in the case of Grand Blue Fantasy Versus,
is a hammer, everything is a nail.
Yeah, and like you said, even Grand Blue Fantasy Versus being as close to balanced as it is, there still are certain playstyles that are kind of invalidated.
Yeah, I wouldn't
zoners
count
are bad in
there's
that
only
game.
One grappler, but yes, zoners are bad.
The best zoner is used just because he can do more than just zone, right?
I mean,
the only zone,
depending on your definition of zoner, the best zoner is Belial.
Right. But basically, yeah. And then like in other examples like Guilty Gear, you're either playing the 1 or 2 really strong zoners, you're playing Happy Chaos, or you're playing Rushdown. Right.
Well, but also in Guilty Gear, every character is a rushdown. Like, it depends on how they get to rushdown, but like Faust, zones, throws projectiles, uses like long hitboxes with the big scalpel staff,
and then once he gets a hit, then he goes to the rushdown.
Yeah. So I guess that's a different way to have.
That's a different case.
To have a healthy variety. As long as you don't get to the point where you have Happy Chaos.
Yeah, and as long as you enjoy Rushdown.
Because that is a very sad chaos. Actually, it's not even chaos. He's not Happy Chaos, he's Sad Order.
Yeah, and then when you have...
Depressed Order.
Yeah, and honestly...
I knew exactly what was happening.
So like many modern fighting games go in that same kind of direction where everything kind of boils down to Rushdown, right? Yeah. Because they're too afraid to let zoners be strong because of the obvious reasons. It creates a passive and frustrating meta. But then they always forget about the middle of the road, right? Those mid-range, versatile, your Shotos, your Ryus and stuff, right? They always end up falling by the wayside as they struggle to, strive to prevent long range being predominant, and then it just inevitably overcorrects into Rushdown being
wasn't Ryu top tier once,
and for whatever reason people cried about it a lot in Street Fighter 5. Him and Chun-Li were top tier in season
like Street Fighter 5 because if I remember correctly, each character didn't have that many tools in their toolkit. So there wasn't that much.
There was less variety per character. Yeah.
There wasn't much expression. Like basically every player who played a certain character would generally play the same.
Yeah. Exactly. So versatility really. Yeah. Versatility is important, and then like you said, a little bit of limited for it's a I guess the ultimate way to describe it is structured for variety.
Yeah, you have a wrench, you have a screwdriver, you have a drill. Insert 2 other tools that are equally important. But
structured variety is the key, because a lot of people, they just want more characters or more rushdown, right? More mix up, right? More assists, whatever. But that often creates less balance.
That's why I said there's a problem there with like pre-established brands doing that, because people want to see so many more characters the longer it's gone. So I mean, I think that's part of why you see the difficulties in meta more and more, because all of the popular fighting games, right, they're long running brands with characters that people are attached to. And I mean, even Smash as well, like being a crossover game, there are so many characters that people want to see, and that's why the roster got larger and larger and larger.
And that's why I couldn't play the newer Smashes competitively just because there's so many matchups to learn. But then ultimately what happens? Steve is dominating. One character dominates.
Yeah, like I said, you don't use the worst wrenches.
Exactly. So it had the inverse effect ultimately.
Yeah, but also even like Street Fighter, Tekken, you know.
Yeah, there are people who say that a roster
like,
less.
They're very.
I've seen people unironically say that less than, what was it? Less than 25 or 30 characters at launch is too small a roster. I'm like, excuse? You're literally asking for an imbalanced game at launch.
But then you have cases like if I remember correctly, in Street Fighter 6 wasn't there was like some like classic like super mainstay character that wasn't a base roster character, and it was like ridiculous. It was like
I'm not sure.
Guile or someone. Like
no, that was 5. Yeah.
Oh, 5. Okay, yeah.
5 was the one that started with, I think, 15 characters.
Yeah.
When it launched.
And like I said, so many characters that people want to see, and sometimes, it's characters that are like, it's a no-brainer. Why weren't they in the main roster? But there are so many characters that people are attached to that somebody's going to be upset if the roster isn't
I'm
big
a weird
enough on
person
launch,
then.
right?
I'm a weird person then because for me, Street Fighter 5 seasons 1 and 2 were actually the most fun I had with the game. And but to be fair, I was a Ryu and Chun-Li player.
Yeah, you didn't happen to be someone with a favorite character who wasn't there at the start.
But who shifted into Karin once they Ryu and Chun-Li got nerfed.
You would have been at least a little irritated.
Yeah,
because like, where's my boy? Right?
True. But, so then it becomes
too many characters.
It becomes an impossible.
Where somebody is going to be missing their boy or the girl. You know,
it becomes an impossible challenge, right? To create a healthy meta. It becomes
more and more impossible to please everybody because you have too many historic characters who people are attached to.
But then the problem is, new IPs that don't have that issue never get traction.
Yep.
So it's literally just a paradox.
Yeah.
The meta is a paradox in and of itself.
Spinning plates.
Yeah. So then, okay, so if you had to sum up,
are we doomsaying? Are we just saying there is no way? Give up?
I mean, to be completely honest, I think, because like I told you about that one card game, right, called Keyforge, where there is no deck building. You buy a pre-made deck, you cannot change that deck, and you have to learn how to pilot that deck. And obviously, some decks will be stronger than others at completing the win condition, right? But ultimately, the most balanced meta is no meta. Or truly the only way to have a balanced meta is no meta.
Yeah, but if you get to
a certain decks, point, you find the decks you like to play, and you just play those decks.
But if you go far enough, you get to like, well, the most balanced meta is Street Fighter 1, right? Because there's one character.
Yep.
Well, nobody wants to play that now.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's
it's not going to have any longevity, right?
Metas are always going to be imbalanced.
In flux.
You want to get it balanced enough.
Yeah, because you need variety for longevity, right? And for things to stay fresh. Yeah. So then the question becomes, how often should a meta change just to keep fresh then? Because if you can't truly have a balanced meta, then I guess the question becomes, should meta shakeups happen more often or less often?
True.
Right?
Because like at a certain point when the balance patch became commonplace, it changed from this is how it is, it's been shipped, and the players will figure it out, which sometimes led to wildly unbalanced messes, but sometimes it also led to unbalanced messes that the players love.
Yeah, and then in other cases, surprisingly balanced like upper tiers that check each other.
Yeah, like Third Strike, which actually, strangely, like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, people actually didn't play it much for a variety of reasons in arcades.
Yeah, we don't have to go into detail on that, but yeah.
But currently, cult classic because it's surprisingly balanced, even though there are two very obvious best characters in the game.
Yoon and
Chun-Li. But there are a number. It's actually pretty similar to Melee. Yeah. Where you have a larger number of like still very high tiers
that are viable,
and a different, like a variety of different like you have Urian, who is like extremely high skill character. With like depths of skill to plumb. You have more simple characters that you can play.
You have Ken, like, who's super versatile.
Yeah, Ken can like more basic, but also not as specialized. You have Makoto, who is a bit more basic, but has like one game plan. You know, like you have your cadre of like second tier characters who can still hang. Decently.
And so the majority of players, you know, Chun-Li and Yoon aren't going to be dominating until you get to the point of a level of skill where it matters, right? Where the meta actually matters. And so
then you have some jobbers at the bottom.
Yeah. And so then the question becomes
also I think it's valuable to have those low tiers, because there will be players who you know want to play a lower tier, a mid tier, or a low tier, like because they're unique or they're interesting, or for the challenge of trying to win with a lower tier, you know, like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Even though like tournament results would probably be relatively the same if some of these characters were missing, it wouldn't quite be the same if Q wasn't there, for instance, right? Like Q is not a high tier character, but people love him. He's fun. He's interesting.
And in cases like that, I would say that's when I feel like watching the non, you know, top level players play is actually more entertaining, because there's a bit more variety and you get to see those oddball characters actually being played, right?
So there's also value in having those oddballs as well.
Like Dan, right? Seeing someone come in with Dan, the joke character, and actually doing stuff is just entertaining as heck.
But sorry, I left fielded us from
is there a healthy frequency of shakeups for a meta to stay interesting then? Or is a more static meta better?
Well, like nowadays, especially with you know, people's attention and the fact that there's more different forms of media competing for attention now than in the past, when the balance patch wasn't really a thing. You kind of have to shake it up in order to keep people's attention,
because people get bored fast. Or at least their attention is taken by other things fast.
Like games like Melee and Street Fighter Third Strike will maintain the attention of their dedicated fan base, but also that group isn't growing. And part of it is because it's a very old game, but also because the meta doesn't change, right? On the other hand, there's like with shaking up the meta over and over again, is like kind of have to time that with tournaments as well, and
and if you do it too frequently, then some people get frustrated because the time they put into a character can be invalidated, right? That's why a lot of people complained about what was it, Mortal Kombat NRS, one of the Mortal Kombat's NRS putting in balance patches like I'm sure it's an exaggeration when they say they balance patched it every 2 weeks, but it was like at least once a month, you know.
But
at the same time, some games have been successful with frequent balance patches, like League of Legends.
But they kind of have to. They kind of have to shake these games up with balance patches nowadays. But
pretty much
the main issue with that is like just making sure you don't do it too often or too little. Why is it always that we need to find some other topics where the answer isn't balance? I swear we this is what we keep coming back to. It's like Sisyphus. We're rolling the boulder and we get to balance and then we drop the boulder again.
Hey, maybe people eventually get the freaking message that balance is best. Like, come on, like so many people in this world live in imbalance. You know, live in extremes, and it's almost never the ideal way to do anything at this point. Like that lack of balance is of like variety, right? Is literally why I've kind of fallen out of love with playing fighting games. I've kind of settled more into I enjoy doing commentary more than actually playing at this point in my life. in terms of that genre, and I've kind of moved on to other genres more because they offer me more variety, right, and freedom to play how I want without being like an imbalanced mess, right? Like Monster Hunter, and you know, to an extent battle royales like Naraka, which I want to play more right now because they actually have a Gundam crossover thing, which is really interesting looking.
Just a human shaped Gundam.
Yeah, I mean Gundams are human shaped.
Human size.
Yeah, essentially.
Listen.
Hey, you know what? Call of Duty did that recently with basically the characters cosplaying as Gundams, the Grandpappy Gundam and the Gundam Aerial.
It's still just strange when I see like a Gundam or like a Transformer
that's human size.
That's human size, like when they added the Optimus Prime to Fortnite.
Oh yeah, and sized them down. Yeah. It's like they're giant robots. That's part of the point.
Baby Optimus Prime.
Okay. But yeah, you know, it's just like I do feel like that variety, you know, you need that variety in the game. Yeah. Not too much, not too little, like we said, balance.
Every tool in its place.
Yeah, exactly. And it's okay if some tools are weaker than others, as long as they're all there and you have, you know, somewhat viable, right? That's the goal. Like, you don't have to make everything 50-50 balance. That's impossible. But just try to have everything have some viable representation, and that's the healthiest meta you could possibly make.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's value in having those mid and low tiers, because yeah.
But as long as for every low tier zoner there is a viable zoner, right? Or every low tier rushdown there's a viable rushdown. Try to balance it that way, right? That way, if players want to, they can have their, like for you, right? In Grand Blue, you have your fun character, your Vasaraga. He's a low tier, but you love him. And then you have your high tier Siegfried.
Nowadays, he's like a low mid tier, I think.
Right, but you have your Vasaraga. Then you have your Siegfried, and he's like number 4 in the game, top 5 easily. Then you have
he's my high tier main.
And then you have your middle of the road dude. You like playing Vayne. Exactly. Yeah. So you know, that's the kind of variety you need in a PvP kind or competitive kind of game. Is like give players a variety so that they can have something of each tier level, so to speak, to latch onto and enjoy playing. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's when you have a healthy meta state. Like right now I think they nerfed Nier a little bit, so she's not as oppressive. And
they have nerfed Nier, yes.
And that's made for a healthier meta. Ooh, I went Australian for a second there. Healthy meta.
British metamorphosized.
Oh man.
Going English, innit?
Yeah. But you know, the meta's healthier than when she was just able to run wild, right? A good Nier was able to just play her own game separate from the way everyone else plays and just run wild.
All my homies still hate Nier, but yeah.
And that's Happy Chaos, right? I feel like they might have to nerf him a little more, but the problem with a character like that is you can't nerf. As soon as they make him not top tier, he's going to be low tier. I don't think a character like that can be in the middle.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's possible.
Once he starts having a box, the character is just box better.
Yeah, so it's like that's one of those situations where what do? Do you allow him to stay high tier or do you nerf him? I know you personally, with your personal bias, you say nerf him to the ground.
Do it.
Yeah, you say give him the Charlie Nash treatment and just chop him off at the knees. But like, so then for those, so if they do that though, then they're gonna have to provide players who enjoyed his style play someone else who's somewhat viable, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they buff Axel a little bit or something, right?
People hate Axel though.
Well, that's the problem. You can't have a long range.
They're not analogous enough to each other. It's not like they're functions, right?
No, and Guilty Gear and Blaze Blue and those anime fighting games are a case where every character plays so drastically different from each other that they have
such distinct personality that a player who's attached to one isn't going to be able to just migrate to another.
So then
at this point, I think most fighting games are like that at this point, because again, the established IPs, right?
Well, so that bears the question then, is a little bit of homogenization and system mastery dependency actually more ideal then? Because think about Virtua Fighter. right? The characters do have differences, but they're not Guilty Gear different, right, from each other. When you have your fundamentals, you can pick up any character and play them to a fundamental level, right? But they do have their distinct, idiosyncrasies that differentiate them, but they're all also very versatile, and that has been arguably one of, if not the most balanced fighting game.
It's an entirely different kind of fighting game,
and it is one of the most balanced in history.
If you did that though, then you wouldn't be able to have all the crazy stuff like you do in fighting games that are more like Strife or like even Marvel vs. Capcom.
But for me, like Virtua Fighter is more fun than all of those combined.
Yeah, but like that kind of game design doesn't work for games where you have like these crazy abilities and stuff in these characters.
Yeah,
right? Like you can't homogenize it when you have like one character that's like, oh, I'm having fun with this gun I found,
and I guess it depends on
who's a samurai with one arm and a claw arm.
I guess it depends on what type of homogenization.
And then a big dude in a metal suit who can like break you up, up and like back down from heaven.
Yeah.
Like,
so what I'm thinking is it depends on what type of homogenization, because Guilty Gear is a game where all the characters are homogenized into flavors of Rushdown, and it's a wildly imbalanced game.
Yeah, but they all have like extremely distinct character and
mechanics,
in how they play, and you learn the character, right?
Rather than learning the game.
That's the absolute opposite of homogenized.
True.
You could say that the like it's homogenized in the way that like everyone rushes down, except when you don't. Chaos. But it's like absolutely the opposite as far as like toolkits. But the thing is, like you kind of need that distinct character between characters for their toolkits, how they look, how they work, to catch the eye. Be like, ooh, I like that character, I want to do that stuff, right? Like you can't have everybody, like if you had a fighting game full of boxers, then it wouldn't draw.
Well, well, because the thing is, like with that, and I will always, a hill I will die on is the nuanced differences in styles of boxing and techniques is sufficient for me.
Yeah,
but for most people it's not, because it's not surface level enough.
Okay, no, but you wouldn't have enough distinct fighting styles to like characterize a whole roster.
Like I said, it's not
fighters,
surface level enough.
You'd be playing you might as well go play an actual like boxing video game or like an anime video game or something. Yeah. Right. But like you even look at your example of a more simple, like down to the ground like game like Virtua Fighter, but you have a whole bunch of different kinds of martial arts, right? Yeah. You don't double up on that. You have a drunken boxing fighter. You have the Jeet Kune Do. You have the
or kickboxing. You have
kickboxing. You have Vale Tudo. What did Go use?
Judo.
Judo. You have the karateka. You have a wrestler, a sumo wrestler.
They're still distinct enough from each other.
Yeah, that's the way that they give them unique voices, unique draws, because like that like is all folded into like the characterization. Like you need that draw in like who the characters are, right? And like even when you start at the beginning, when you're a newbie playing fighting games, right? You look at the roster, you're like, oh, this person looks cool. Oh, I like karate. Right. Oh, I want to play the big wrestler guy and get throws and be awesome.
People,
or, I want to zip around and be a ninja. I'll try the ninja.
Like I said, surface level distinction, because for most people,
you need the surface level and you need the deeper distinctions.
Yeah, because for most people, the differences between a peekaboo aggressive boxer like Mike Tyson and a Philly shell defensive boxer like Mayweather is not different enough to catch most people's interest, right?
Yeah, because
other than the aficionados.
You need the surface to catch attention, and you need the deeper portion. Yeah,
or a mobile outboxer like Muhammad Ali, right? Like if you're into boxing, you can tell the difference, you can see the nuances, and you can appreciate the nuances. And it's one of the few like combat sports that has not altered its rules to push fighters towards aggressive play. right?
But you don't go to fighting games to get just
Yeah.
like realistic and grounded in like one thing.
See,
like
Virtua Fighter is the
go
closest
for
you
the
would get.
buffet.
Yeah, Virtua Fighter is the closest you get, and that's because they
But that's
found ways to distinguish enough characters and have every character have enough versatility that you have that variety. Like when I was playing Virtua Fighter 5 with Gov Pancakes, right? Shout out there. His Vanessa was different from my Vanessa because there's enough character versatility within the same character, right? And so. But to be fair, Virtua Fighter is not as popular as these characters with the wild distinctions like Guilty Gear, Dragon Ball, Grand Blue.
Like, if you want, like again,
Smash Brothers.
I'll say again, if you want like realistic fighting,
play a simulator.
there are MMA games.
Yeah,
there are probably boxing games. I don't know. I haven't checked.
They are, but they're never good because they're never high budget enough.
Yeah, well. But
they're buggy messes
MMA,
often.
They're MMA and wrestling games.
Yeah.
Mainly, I believe.
Pretty much. But they're usually buggy messes. Yeah, they're usually buggy messes.
Yeah.
And even then, they tend to feel very similar. Samey. Yeah. Within the game.
But like if you had a character who was like, kung fu master with ice powers, and then like another character who's like drunken boxing and like fire powers, but like they both play like Ryu, then you're not going to keep the attention because you're like, oh, it's lame. This is, it's lame. Yeah, like they just throw fireballs and then punch, and the animations look different, but they don't, like, they're not meaningfully different.
So then so then the last question, and I just want a very, very simple answer. Would you say then an imbalanced meta is often more fun than a balanced meta?
Yes, because by necessity,
you need variety.
Variety will have imbalance because it's impossible to balance everything against each other if there are different things.
So the
only way to have true balance is stagnation, and nobody will want to play it.
So
like I said, my Street Fighter 1 example, that's the pinnacle of balance.
Well,
right?
here's the thing. There are rare cases like chess, right? Chess is a widely played game and with the most longevity. And it is, it's not exactly a variety. I mean, well, to be fair, there is variety in the pieces that each player has, right?
You don't go to chess for the variety for the personality of the pieces.
Yeah. And to be fair,
you don't go there and be like, oh, I like and also you're
chess
not
has more variety than checkers.
One of the pieces.
Yeah,
you have all the pieces, but like it's not a form of game that has personality attached to it.
And you're not going in and playing checkers the same way. That's a lack of variety right there. Or tic-tac-toe, right? So then then what we're saying is
it's like
variety over balance, basically. Variety over balance.
Because like checkers is like what is it, like Karate Master or whatever, like one of those like proto fighting games on the old consoles, right, where you don't even have special moves yet, and like Street Fighter 1 is like chess, but then you get into like
Street Fighter 2 with the drastically different archetypes,
more modern fighting games, right, with more differentiation, and then you get like the like game like that to equate to something like that would be like Warhammer, right?
Okay,
where your tabletop gaming is getting more complex. With
your armies can be drastically different from each other's. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I like that. So basically, the key is variety rather than just balance. Try to have some measure of balance among the top tiers in terms of what they represent, their archetypes and playstyles they represent.
Yeah,
and then you're going to have a healthy meta. And then you'll have a healthy meta. And it's okay for the balance to shift around here and there to keep things fresh, but try to have viable representation for every playstyle / archetype.
Yeah, viable representation for a variety of playstyles among the top tiers.
And then shake it up occasionally.
Need some mid tiers and low tiers, for like casual play and whatnot, or the people that just want to flex, You have to shake it up occasionally. Just try to make sure to know when to shake it up and not do it too much or too little. Again, balance, as we are a broken record saying this.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like that's
so there
it,
you
right?
go. If any game developers actually hear this, give everyone their time to shine, basically. Give every archetype or playstyle that, it is within your game's structure, right? Their time to shine.
And know who to listen to.
Exactly.
Because on the one hand, not all top players even necessarily know what they're talking about. On the other hand, not all low-level players don't know what they're talking about. But
it's definitely possible to know more than you can actually put into application.
Because unfortunately, like a developer team just is never going to be able to predict a meta 100% because, like, no matter how many testers you have, a larger number of players are going to find things that the testers didn't. Or the developers didn't. But,
So you got to be kind of flexible on the fly.
Yeah.
And take a lot of data into account. Okay. And realize that when it comes to discussion about the meta, the loudest voices aren't always the correct ones.
Yes.
If anything, the loudest ones are usually the ones who have a negative view of the current meta. And that's not necessarily
that just gets into the whole like design of social media to push negative topics and things to see, because that pushes people to speak more than positive does, and that's a whole,
and that's just people, that's feedback in general, right? That's just feedback in general, and anyone who's worked a customer service job knows that the majority of people.
Not like I'm any different. I'm more inclined to say something about something that I am irritated by than something that
it's
I
just
like.
human nature. Pretty much. But that's why we do what we do on this podcast. We're trying to have a very, like we said, the path to balance is variety, rather than stagnation and echo chambers, right? So there you go.
We're strangely enough, I feel like we both kind of, when interacting with each other, we kind of will tend towards being a contrarian in a different way sometimes, to where we balance each other out.
And then we come to center.
Like you are a contrarian to the masses, and I will be a contrarian to you sometimes. So
But okay, I think we're pretty much done with the discussion here. We got into a lot of things.
The meta of CounterPick.
So that was a good discussion there. I like that. That was fun. So many ups and downs. So that has been
my name at the beginning.
So what now? Oh yeah, I did. Okay, so that's season 3 episode 4 in the books. For those who are watching live, the edited version will come up midweek. I usually upload it on the following Wednesday in the morning.
Keep in that intro,
and then it'll be I will. And then the audio only version goes up on podcast platforms that same day as well in the morning. So you'll be able to listen to it next week. If you missed it live, the VOD goes unlisted, so the only way to get to it is through the link that I posted in the Discord and on social media. But then I upload an edited and somewhat truncated, where I trim down some silences and stuff like that, just to make it a little more streamlined, right? Add a little background music on very low, just to make it a little more pleasant of a listening experience. And that's pretty much the format here. So that's episode 4. We're doing this monthly. We've been keeping up with it since we started, revived it, and we're gonna keep doing this. It's live the last weekend, the last Saturday of every month. So come and join us. You can actually pitch in, chime in to the discussion, and your messages will appear on the video versions. So feel free to join us if you're listening to this after the fact, next month on the last Saturday of the month for our next discussion. And just stay tuned to the social media. You can just use the hashtag CounterPickPod, all together, one word, to see the updates on that. Or you can follow me and Sai on Twitter/X or join the Discord. So all the appropriate links will be easily findable. My handle everywhere is s_factor_sam, and Sai, your handle everywhere is
Sai Prime, SAI Prime. Yeah,
you're not gonna spell out Prime.
Y'all can look at a dictionary.
PRIME.
What?
And yeah, Sai actually he has a YouTube channel as well, and he's doing some stuff.
Yeah, I have
the occasional stream, and he's working on some videos.
Streams of the aforementioned mentioned Dragon Ball Fusion World. I'm working on hopefully some scripted content at some point, some more streams. Yeah, things like that. Maybe like let's play videos, streams playing games, scripted content about various geek topics. My whole professor shtick. Yeah.
And then you can also often find him in my content, whether he be the person I'm playing with, or in the comments, or chat, or the VC. He's also often around. So, yeah, that's pretty much it from us. That's been this episode of CounterPick New Perspectives. We will see you in the next episode on the last Saturday of next month. You have a great rest of your day, whatever time of the day it is when you're listening to this. See ya.
Bye.